Rick and Morty comic issue 6. We start out with someone sitting in a throne with a helmet over his face, being promised by a scared scientist that this time a device will work. The scientist is confident that this seed will survive the interdimensional trip. Why wouldn't it? When he says that their dreams will finally come true, the bad guy gets all nihilistic, speaking in big words, and says that the world should have more science and fewer dreams. And it seems like the villain has a speech impediment. He says that today everything changes, and says goodbye to the scientist and has him dragged off, even though that scientist worked hard for him. That was an arbitrary villain fall. I know he's supposed to be a bad guy, but that doesn't make this behavior make sense. He plans on changing the fate of the multiverse, and we cut to Rick being told by someone laughing to knock it off. Rick sprays Morty with water, saying casually that they're just goofing around, and Morty says that they have to get the soapbox racer ready for the big race tomorrow, and they have a busy day ahead. For once, Rick's being a good grandpa to him. Rick says today's been fun, and he's glad they had this time together, lampshading that he doesn't say this enough in the show or comic. He gets interrupted by a sound, and a giant green monster shows up. Rick's apparently not that surprised, and just says that's too soon, and it's here. That's needlessly confusing. Considering the nature of Rick and Morty, the two of them enjoying themselves together like a normal grandpa and grandson helped foreshadow that something would immediately go wrong. Rick throws Morty the portal gun and gets killed, proving that this wasn't actually the Rick we usually see in this comic, because that would be way too gutsy. And he tells Morty to warn the other Ricks. Then we see another dimension. I wish there was a yellow text box telling us if this is the one we're used to from the comic or not, but I guess it is. Where Morty asks Rick why he doesn't want to build a soapbox racer with him, lampshading that spending time with his own family member isn't going to kill him. I know that feels. Rick asks if he really wants him to kick him when he's down. Morty lampshades that it'd be a real wholesome activity they don't do enough of. And after Morty insults him about something petty for a while, an alternate Morty warps in and collapses for some reason, and Rick wonders if he really should build that razor just as dull dealing with this. The other Morty gets generously put in a bed and tells them both what happened to him. Morty leaves the room compassionately saying that they should order a pizza for the other Morty, and Rick runs away telling him to run, fearing for their lives. He wants to hide, and he says that for years the Council of Ricks have been speculating about someone trying to kill all the Ricks in the multiverse. Years, wow. For some reason, Rick assumed they were wrong about the mass extinction of Ricks because the Council are idiots, even though one, well, something like that already happened and we got introduced to evil Rick and Morty, and two, they're geniuses just like him, and three, most Ricks we've seen are jerks, so it's very much justified to try to get rid of all of them. This would be like Scourge trying to kill every Robotnik in the multiverse. It's not really an evil plan, just a threatening sounding one. So Rick shouldn't have doubted that someone would be up to this. It'd make more sense if he was just in denial out of fear instead. He says that he's been monitoring the Ricks lately, I guess because he started to snap out of the denial and get paranoid that they really were getting targeted. And he realized what was going on. I think this comic started being released before the whole evil Morty thing came to a head in season 3. So I guess not intentionally trying to subvert your expectations by having the villain not be him. But it would be the obvious choice. That's the only evil plan I could imagine evil Morty having right away. That's the most predictable idea and would let him do something as a villain again, finally. Somehow Morty is naive enough to ask why anyone would want to kill all the Ricks, even after everything he's been put through with Rick and his adventures. The comic hasn't made it very clear if you're just familiar with it, but trust me, in the first episode of the show alone, Morty ended up being forced to shoot people to death to avoid going to prison. And even though they were aliens, he still hated doing it. In fact, I've counted, and Morty's ended up killing approximately roughly 79 people over the course of the show alone. And that's all Rick's fault. I guess this is just here to showcase how naive and nice Morty really is. It's odd though because he's been shown to snap at him for petty reasons a lot too. Probably because of all the repressed resentment of him for legitimate reasons. So one minute he's being snarky and mad and standing up to him, and the next he thinks Rick being targeted is just crazy. You never know if Morty's gonna side with Rick or not. Anyways, Morty naturally asks where they could possibly go to hide since every Rick is being targeted. And Rick says that because he spent years exploring the universe, he's only ever found one dimension that didn't have a Rick born there. That is completely impossible. Realistically, there would be a lot more dimensions than just one that never had a Rick. And in fact, I think most of them would, just like how most dimensions wouldn't have any particular person in our dimension. And here's why. This series constantly emphasizes that there's infinite realities, so with that in mind, the very idea that in all the realities, there's only one where Rick's parents didn't end up having a kid together is just ridiculous. For Rick to have been born, or anybody for that matter, first off, his parents had to have survived long enough to have had coitus together. Anything could have happened to one of them before that. Second, there's tons of different sperm that his father had. So the likelihood that only one particular one would end up going to the uterus is just as likely for that one as it would be for all the others. So it should, if anything, be much more likely that they would have had a kid who wasn't Rick. That is how it works, isn't it? Not to mention there's a 50-50 chance any person born will be a girl. And yet throughout the franchise, we'll only ever see 2 female Ricks. Come to think of it, realistically there would also be plenty of dimensions where Rick had a twin sibling. Third, his parents would have to have lived in the same area as each other at the same time so that they could even meet in the first place. Or they wouldn't. It's possible that one of them could have moved to another city or been forced to. Fourth, there's also the possibility that his mother could have had an abortion or miscarriage. Fifth, since every counterpart of anyone would have a slightly unique life, what are the chances that every version of Rick's mom and dad would have dated the right person out of tons of choices instead of trying out other people and staying with them? His mother could have had different dating preferences, which could depend on how she was raised. Not to mention, there might be a possibility she could be, born mentally challenged, for example, depending on how her genes are. Sixth, it's possible that their relationship could go so badly that they don't sleep together and have him. Probably because of different genes, maybe. You get the idea, right? Not to mention we've seen other Ricks that are different species, and I don't see how they remotely count as a Rick Sanchez then if they have different DNA. There's Wasp Rick, for example. I guess it's just he's the one most like Rick Sanchez in that universe, so he counts, apparently. I feel like there's more reasons, but the point is, it's much more likely that in another universe you wouldn't have been conceived since there was such a small chance of it happening compared to so many other possibilities. But of course, the obvious explanation is that since there's an infinite amount of universes, that means this Rick has only visited a really small amount of them compared to the infinite amount there are. Combine that with the fact that Ricks tend to zone hop if things go south for them. How is Rick supposed to know that a Rick he sees is mated to that dimension or not? Rick's surprisingly lazy sometimes. He doesn't always bother to tell people why he's warning them not to do something and it backfires on him. So he wouldn't go check and ask every Rick if they're meant to live where they are. And even real life has some pretty crazy coincidences that'll make you want to believe in fate. So while it is a pretty big coincidence that nearly every universe this Rick has visited has a Rick Sanchez living in it, native or not, it's not actually impossible. I wish this tangent didn't last so long, but it doesn't need to be said once in a series with parallel universes in it. That outright has a council of Ricks in it. There's no way every universe ever has a counterpart to everyone on one planet living there. Anyways, Rick plans on going to a dimension that's never had a Rick Sanchez of any kind born there. Realistically, if there's infinite Ricks, he would not be the only one who would do this obvious thing. I mean, the other Rick that we just saw obviously already knew about the monster killing all the Ricks ahead of time. So exactly. He would go to that dimension only to discover a huge amount of other Ricks there. Or a huge amount would inevitably come there if he was the first. We even saw the Rick that died knew that it was coming, so he must have been aware of the Rick extinction too. But it happened too soon for him to plan to take off. Maybe that's why he insisted on spending quality time with his Morty, because he knew what was coming. And he was in denial about how soon it would happen because it'd be smarter to zone hop to safety and then build the car with them. I guess Rick's so selfish and egocentric that it does make sense that he'd assume he was the only Rick ever to have this idea, or at least the first. Because he's not really about considering others. It was sweet of him to tell Morty they doesn't have to come with them. after all the times he forced him to go on adventures with them. And Morty has a sweet moment with him because he insists on coming with them, even after everything he's put him through. At first I didn't get the joke after Rick said that was super weird and made him promise he'd never do it again. And then I realized that Rick was lampshading how improbable it was that both of them at the same time would say Rick and Morty for 1,000 years. It's not that improbable though, because Morty was just quoting one of the things Rick said to him at the end of the pilot episode, where he enthusiastically went on and on about how he wanted Morty to be his sidekick forever. Instead, the writing showed self-awareness. They go in through the portal, and sadly, even though the other Morty was looking forward to pizza after the traumatizing thing he went through, we see the shadow of something go up to him, and he gets interrupted, implying he was killed off. That's a shame. He's a Morty, not a Rick, so why? He was just mean-spirited. And when Rick and Morty come back, we're not gonna see them deal with this monster. So how did this monster not proceed to kill everybody in the house? I guess he only cared about tying up loose ends by killing the Morty from another dimension. But why would he care about that? Meanwhile, Rick complains about the universe he's in, calling it cyber trash after making a ton of pop culture references I don't get. Morty's the voice of reason, telling him to try to enjoy it here. And they walk into a bar, and Rick complains that the alcohol tastes like battery acid. I guess he's just saying that to insult it, because how would he know what exactly that tastes like and live to tell the tale? Morty says he doesn't like it here, and a guy is glaring at him, and Rick says that it might be because he's the only one not dressed like he's mad at his stepdad. I always love how witty Rick is. It was nice of Morty and Rick to put their arms around each other's backs as they walked out of the bar, while some menacing, shadowy figure watches them. Rick keeps joking about the futuristic place he's in, making guesses about what it's like based on his knowledge of pop culture. And then a big burly guy with a helmet and gun says Rick's name threateningly. He also knows that Rick shouldn't exist here, and he throws someone off his back after he jumps on him, and accuses him of moving in on his score. So the main bad guy sent an assassin after Rick, immediately knowing that he would have come to this dimension where there was no Rick. Go figure, it's the obvious place to go. The big guy gets killed, and the person who did it, Summer, says that the rumors are true and Rick and Morty shouldn't be here. So, they're walking around this place for like a minute, and already there's rumors all over the place that they're here. I guess Morty was recognized because of his similarity to this dimension's Morty. Considering that Summer exists here, that means there's a Morty too. And so the people who spotted them in the bar might have gotten to talking, spreading the message on Twitter and Facebook. And Summer would have found out about it from her addiction to social media, apparently. Or more likely, the main bad guy of this arc told the news that Rick and Morty would show up, and sent out wanted posters for them. Obviously, the fact that this world even has a Summer in it when no Rick was born there is suspicious, as is the fact that Summer knows the exact name of the dimension she's living in already, instead of it just being the only dimension she's ever known or is aware of. A Beth with an eye patch tells the bad guy that they failed to recover the package. What's the point of her speaking with a euphemism? He knows what she's talking about, and they're alone. He remains hopeful despite still insisting on talking like an over-dramatic cartoon villain with no self-awareness of it, even though he's an alternate version of Morty. Seriously, why have him talk like this instead of talking like Morty? That'd take more advantage of him being a Morty. He won't call his mom Mother. Why does his forehead look like a Klingon? He'd have to have been the victim of an experiment or something to have a face like this, and for what benefit? I don't see how it happened by accident, or on purpose. That wasn't a good design. But it's still brilliant that the one who wants to destroy all the Ricks is a Morty. Who else would it be when a Morty would have the most motive against the Ricks, other than a Summer? And Summer's surprisingly loyal to Rick in the show. And it's a twist that's not evil Morty. It's realistic that there would be more than just the one evil Morty. In fact, realistically, most Mortys would end up turning against their Rick, and it's unusual that they don't. Maybe the reason most Mortys aren't against Ricks to the point where they're subservient and polite instead, is that most Ricks don't have a problem with using science to mess with their brain so that they stay that way. Because if it's that common, that they're subservient, it can't just be up to chance. And the Mortys who have a backbone are the ones whose Ricks refuse to do that to them. So this story was about the revelation that an evil, ugly Morty wants to destroy all of the Ricks. And the protagonist got advance warning to go high because of an alternate Morty warning them just in time. and I guess he got killed out of spite for doing that. So Rick gets the idea to warp to a dimension where he wasn't born, and that turns out to be the dimension where the ugly Morty's living. It does make sense that if he hates Rick so much, he'd want to live in a universe where there never was one, because that'd be safer. The fact that he hates Rick when he lives in a place where there never was a Rick implies two possibilities. One, that he's not a native to here and moved here away from his Rick after he was turned against him. Or two, he had a traumatizing experience with a Rick that moved here from another dimension, as Mortys tend to have. It's always fascinating to see an evil version of a good main character, especially so when the evil twin's in a prominent, threatening role taking advantage of them. The story went out of its way to have Morty contrast himself with him by being unusually naive and sweet, reminding me why I like him. Usually the confusing thing about evil twins that can make them poorly written is that they seem to have almost nothing in common with their twin personality-wise, when it's unrealistic for someone sharing their exact DNA. And there's no explanation for why they turned out evil. While the former seems true here, as the ugly Morty isn't even talking like Morty at all, and thus seems like a completely different character. There is a point to him being a Morty because it gives him the strongest motive for having something against Rick's. Though Rick has plenty of other people with reason to hate him. But still, it would be much better characterization if the writing tried a lot harder to show us what he has in common with our Morty to take advantage of him being a Morty. Like, I don't know, like a Jessica robot for him, or a Jessica billboard of a supermodel that looks like her. Because if he's just gonna be portrayed as a melodramatic cartoon villain, then he could be anybody. He doesn't even have the same type of speech impediment. In fact, he's speaking perfectly clearly and just has trouble pronouncing the letter P. You'd think his Rick would have made some science gadget to cure that after getting really annoyed with it, or would have gone to speech therapy by now. But yeah, as usual, this was a good issue. It had great high stakes and was interesting.